Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and a very warm welcome from Moch Cymru for this evening's webinar, which we're going to cover Managing to Measure, an introduction to recording and measuring pig performance for the practical pig keeper. I'm Melanie Cargill, and I'm the project manager of Moch Cymru, and we're delighted to have Dom Charman join us this evening to deliver the webinar. Dom is an independent consultant working within the pig industry with years of experience within the sector, working with a huge amount of pig keepers to help them improve their performance. Before I pass you on to Dom, I just want to make you aware that there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So throughout the webinar, if you would like to ask any questions, you're very welcome to do so by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll try our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end. So we'll dive straight into it, I think, Dom, and yeah, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Mel. I'll just get my slides. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming along. Sorry. Right. Hopefully you can just see my slides and not all of my copious notes.
Yep, just the slides.
Excellent. Right. So, managing to measure is the question. Mel covered most of this. We're independent pig consultants working in the industry. So we work quite a lot with data, farm management, business strategy, all sorts of stuff. And our customer sort of headcount at the minute in terms of stock ranges from sort of 4 or 5 sales, very specialist sort of producers, right the way up to sort of 60,000 sales. Some of the biggest guys in the UK. We do quite a bit of work, Denmark and Holland, obviously all remote at the minute, and a little bit of work in Ireland and various other places. And then we sort of provide a little bit of consultancy via third parties into China and places like that. And actually, we have a very close relationship with AgriVision, who are the biggest sort of pig data company in the UK and across Europe. So this is our bag, really. One of the questions that came up when Mimo were discussing this as well is, the guys, you guys who are producers in Wales, it tends to be sort of more specialist production, not necessarily just smaller herds, but they tend to be more specialist breeds. So specific breeds for specific purposes, either direct to customers in terms of the pig, the pig meat, or through farm shops or that kind of thing. And I'll answer that with a example and another question. I actually worked on this unit. This is Patoa, it's called. So it's the largest outdoor pig unit in the Southern Hemisphere. And we had 56,000 head of stock, so 4,500 breeding sows, farrow to finish all on one site, which would be fairly unusual for an operation of that size. There are no operations that size in the UK, farrow to finish on a single site. All outdoor sales, very large number of staff, a lot of machinery, big business. And we sold 1,400 pigs a week. And this is obviously a very large example, but it's still a good example. And the question would be, do we think that's good or bad or indifferent or average or whatever?
We've got a poll, so I've just launched that.
Absolutely, pick a choice. Well timed. Apparently, I'm not allowed to vote.
There we go. So we've had it's 40-60 split. So 40% think less and 60% think not sure.
Okay. So based on average production for the outdoors in the UK, they should have been doing around 60% more. Now, that's, and we'll get into this in a bit, it might be that production, pure numbers, is not your target as a business, and that's perfectly valid to have lower production than if you're aiming for meat quality or you're using specialist breeds or you're getting a premium. But these guys were producing pure commercial pigs, trying to optimize their number of pigs sold and the weight of animals sold per week. An average performing outdoor herd in the UK would be doing 850 more pigs a week than that, so 60% more production. And like I say, we have a customer with 2 times the number of sows who produces 3 times the number of piglets every week. And that would be true whether they had 4 sows and 12 sows, or 4,500 sows and sort of 12,000 sows. It's the scale of it is kind of irrelevant to this, but it shows that big, small, or in the middle, really having a grip of your numbers is really important. And actually, that herd didn't do any recording. And that just shows you, they were making money because in New Zealand, there were at the time 45,000 sows. So we had 10% of the national herd on one site in one pair of hands. They had, there was an abattoir about an hour away in Christchurch who produced charcuterie, who basically couldn't buy pigs off anybody else on any real scale. So they still made money. But they were making money on every pig they sold, and they should have been selling 850 more pigs a week, which would have been much more money. So it shows that these sort of, just because a business is enormous doesn't necessarily mean they're doing the right thing. And the same is true, if they'd recorded, it wouldn't matter the scale of them. They would have known that they could have done more with their business just to meet their targets. So the question is, is it relevant? I would say it's even more relevant really for smaller herds, and for more specialist herds, because your ability to get access to accurate benchmarking data as specialist producers is much more limited than a commercial herd, because there is published every year, or every quarter indeed at the minute, there are benchmarking reports published from sort of about 85% of the national herd that shows, average born alive, the various metrics we'll go through later, for indoor and outdoor breeding, and then some combined figures for the finishing herd. Now, we're involved in assembling those figures for the industry, and they are fairly accurate. They're as accurate as they can be from the data available, but they wouldn't be as representative for a specialist producer, and they wouldn't be as representative for a smaller producer. But the pressures you have in your business, if the pigs are part of the business, and actually even if the pigs is a hobby, they still can't sort of burn money unnecessarily, is every enterprise has normally farming enterprises have numerous enterprises on the same business. So you'll have some sheep, or you'll do some forestry work, or some contracting. You may even have a full-time job. Some people do when they keep smaller scale herds. My partner did the same thing. But you still need to know what the performance is, because other things are competing for that finance. Be it even sort of hobby pig keepers who have no intention of killing pigs. Still have to have a new kitchen or have a new car or whatever it is. There's always something competing for that limited resource, be it time, be it money, be it equipment. It's also quite easy to manage pigs by numbers. Most of our commercial customers would be on a single week, a 3-weekly, or a 5-weekly batch, and on X day in that cycle, serving will happen. On Y day, weaning will happen, and on Z day, farrowing will happen, and it will keep happening. So it can be done by numbers. You can just over and over and over again keep it quite tight, still manage the welfare well, still manage the production well, and keep it all together. But if you have no idea of the numbers, that management by numbers slips away. And that's one of the reasons why actually some of the smaller herds we deal with, quite a few of those guys will have full-time jobs, because you can do the pigs by numbers. So the day they'll farrow, the day they'll wean, and everything else. I've worked extensively in the sheep sector, and what they don't tend to do is, you don't tend to be just about to leave to go to your job, or leave to go to a meeting, or go to something else and be doing something ridiculous, 500 meters above sea level up the side of a hill, because you can time it all much more tightly. But getting hold of those numbers in the first place is so important. And that's what makes them perfect for part-time production. And actually, conventionally, if you went back 50 years, very few people would have been specialist and full-time pig farmers. There would have been some larger mixed farmers who had larger holdings, but it would have been fairly standard to have 2 or 3 as sort of what's termed backyard production, which obviously has tended to go away now because of the concerns around biosecurity and everything else. And it's now moved to sort of smaller scale production and specialist production, but it still means it's possible to do it part-time. The other thing I will say is, and we come across this with benchmarking a lot, the periodicity of data with pigs. So whether it's weekly, 5-weekly, 3-weekly, that kind of thing, you can obviously breed pigs multiple times a year, and there is some seasonal impact, and we'll get into that as well, actually, as a case study. But you can breed them multiple times a year, which means to get the most out of that sort of production cycle, you're not pushing them hard, you're not compromising welfare, providing it's being done well. To get the most out of that sort of asset of that breeding animal, you need to make sure you're tracking performance. I've included this, I think, just as there we go. This is my partner's former herd of pigs. My partner works in the pig industry now at the minute as well. So she actually, we unfortunately can't keep any pigs ourselves at the minute because of the biosecurity of visiting customer farms, because we deal with lots of, most commercial producers, it's 48 hours pig free, and for some of our nucleus customers, it would be 72 or maybe even a week. small scale production systems, and there's a lot of this in sort of snobbery in the pig industry, sometimes with some of the bigger producers and sometimes in the allied industry. Smaller scale production systems aren't necessarily simple. You know, bore cells and finishes can be combined in the same system, which obviously would be very unusual on a large commercial scale that have dedicated housing, everything else. And that makes recording much more important. You know, we've got sort of combinations of animals in those images, which if we're not recording them properly, we just have no idea what's going on at all with them, how old they are, whether they're, you know, if we're breeding our own replacements, we don't know when they're ready to mate because we're not 100% sure how old they are. You know, we don't know what weight they've got to necessarily. And if we're keeping boars, we don't know what we've done with them when we've done it. So just and it doesn't need to be complicated, you know, really doesn't need to be. So in the breeding herd, we tend to talk about the Super 6, and they're there. There's no, don't need to read me slides. You know, just these key figures that allow us to come up with a final figure, which is pigs weaned per cell per year. So for most pig production businesses, a key metric for your breeding animals will be how many pigs you wean per cell per year. Now, an even better one than that, and we'll get into that in a little bit, is pigs sold per cell per year, but that includes a degree of the finishing herd, so it's not strictly a breeding herd metric. The other option with this is to use your fixed asset as the denominator for what is effectively a fraction. So what we often talk about with larger herds is actually the number of sows isn't limited. Now that may not be the case if you're keeping a certain number of sows and you're keeping your operation to 5 or 10 sows, and we have some customers who specifically keep 10 sows because that fits for them. But your limiting factor normally is either infrastructure, so it's things like arcs, machinery, that kind of thing, acreage, just pure space to keep the sows if you keep them outside, or in an indoor system is lactation places, so crates or pens or whatever, however you farrow your cells down. So there is an increasing move in the industry to pigs weaned per farrowing place per year, be that defined as a quarter acre, be that defined as a farrowing pen or whatever, because that allows you to see how many pigs you're weaning, how many animals your breeding herd, which is why we don't say sold so always, just your breeding herd is doing over that fixed asset base. And we can argue all day and all night that arcs aren't fixed assets and everything else, but for a small business, the investment in whether you make them yourselves or you buy them, in time, in money and everything else to have the arcs made, it may well be that actually you don't have the time, you don't have the inclination, you don't have the ability, or there's not the land to put down more arcs. So your lactation place, your farrowing place, is still a relevant denominator for that. So we can also talk, as well as per cell per year, is pigs per lactation place per year, per farrowing place per year. And that gives you an idea of how hard you're working your equipment, if you're getting the most out of it. For the finishing herd, it's pretty basic. So we talk about feed conversion ratio. We also, you see sometimes in Europe or in America, sort of if you're looking online at material from other countries, feed efficiency ratio or feed efficiency, something else they call it, but often feed efficiency. We have to measure feed to do this, and this is one of the most common questions we get asked. We run a lot of trial work for farms and for farming businesses, is how can we measure FCR without measuring FCR? And the answer to that question is you can't. We have to know how much feed has gone into the pigs. But there are easy ways to do that, and actually if you're bagging feed on a smaller site, or you're barrowing or bucketing feed, it's actually often easier to measure it, rather than when it's in a big bin at the end of the shed and it's just augured into a building, because you're physically handling all of that feed. But you have to measure it, or you can estimate it from bags you used over a month, or a delivery ticket or an invoice or something like that. The next one, which we need to know in order to get our FCR really, or we certainly need the same metrics to get there, is our daily live weight gain, which is just weight in and out with our total days finishing. And we'll get into just the actual calculations later, but none of these are complex. Killing out percentage, I would argue, for the type of businesses that tend to proliferate more in Wales, is actually a really important figure. So generally, for the large pig producers in England, the abattoirs, there's only sort of 4 companies that run any big serious commercial abattoirs in the UK that kill pigs, dedicated abattoirs. One's multi-species, and that's a retailer one. They use a fixed figure. They'll sometimes they vary it, but very rarely. So they'll use 76% or whatever. So from our pig being alive and on all 4 feet to dead on the hooks and in a chiller, what does it weigh as a percentage? frequently, 75, 76%. If you're using conventional breeds or purebred animals, that will vary quite dramatically. That will change quite a lot. The way you manage your animals will change that quite a lot as well. What they're fed, how much access they have to things like pasture, to grazing, and I use the term grazing loosely in pigs. That will influence that quite significantly. But if you're working in if you're keeping your supply chain quite tight, and by that I mean you have your pigs back from the abattoir to sell direct, or you supply your pigs directly to a farm shop or something like that, which tends to be more the case with sort of smaller scale and specialist production, because the meat eating quality is better. You should have more of that data actually than a commercial herd will have, because a commercial herd gets a kill sheet back every week with 200, 1,000, however many animals they've killed on it, and it has dead weight and then a live weight. But the live weight is always just calculated from the dead weight, and it's using a fixed percentage. So actually the live weight could have varied quite dramatically, which means our daily live weight gain calculations could be out. And then the other key metric in the finishing herd is kilos sold per year per sow. So we're paid for pig meat, generally speaking. We're paid on kilos dead weight, most commercial contracts. So how many kilos is a sow producing per year? And that becomes more relevant when we've seen the carcass weights in the UK increase massively, particularly recently with the issues, the backlog on farm, but also over the last sort of 10, 15 years. Carcass weights have gone anywhere from sort of mid 70 kilos. At the minute, they're sitting at 113.7 kilos on average. Now, that's a very extreme example because of the current situation we find with people not being able to get pigs off farm, so they're getting overweight. We had one customer send a load of 220 the other day, 137 kilos live weight, which is just unheard of. It's just absolute madness. But again, you will find that your weight per pig with specialist breeds varies quite significantly from that commercial figure, because that figure is published every week of what the average carcass weight is. So knowing how many kilos a sow is producing is very good as a metric to look at your breeding herd performance and your finishing herd in one fell swoop, the whole thing combined together. So that's a nice simple one, and you don't need a huge number of other metrics to get to that. The other one, to come back to the breeding herd again and to your asset base, is to look at weight sold per farrowing place per year. And again, that's a similar calculation. That half the calculation is the same, but it allows you to determine, are we using our arcs to the best efficiency, or this building we've converted, or these, this farrowing house, or this field, whatever the asset base is. And it doesn't matter if it's an acre or it's 10,000 acres or it's 300 farrowing crates. It really doesn't matter. Getting back to that asset base tells you how efficiently you're working it. Because if you buy another arc or another acre or another farrowing crate, you should be doing the same. You shouldn't be, for argument's sake, we shouldn't spread the 300 kilos we were producing over one more farrowing crate. We should be doing another, if we had 5 before, we should be doing another 60 kilos. We should always have that figure, should always be the same. And like I say, you're in a good position. You're in a very strong position, really, if you're a more specialist producer, a more direct producer, because that data, that carcass data, is easier to get back from an abattoir in more detail. So why bother at all, really? There are still people in the industry who do not record at all, commercial producers who do not record at all. I could, if they recorded, I could look at their performance and pick them out from a spreadsheet. I'll be honest, it's fairly easy to see the people who don't record, because you tend to have what would be an issue that would be picked up quicker on a farm that records. These issues kind of linger a little bit: subclinical disease, nutritional problems, stocking density, that kind of thing, just kind of rumbles on and on and on and on, because nobody's looking at the numbers and going, oh, there's a problem there. Everybody should have a business plan, and whether that's in your head or on the back of a VAG packet or whatever, about we want to keep more pigs, or we want to do more profit, or we want to have the best pigs to show, or whatever that is, whatever your passion is for your pigs and for your pig business, whether it's purely commercial, we want to sell as many kilos of pork at the best price every year, we want to do 10,000 in margin, we want to do 5,000 in turnover, we want to do X number of pigs a year, or we want to have champion pigs, we want to show the best pigs, we want to manage the best pigs. It doesn't matter what that is. There should be a business plan, and it doesn't have to be written down. It can just be off the top of your head. But to know if you're moving towards that plan, you really have to be recording stuff and looking at your own performance and benchmarking against yourself. And again, benchmarking we will cover in more detail. There is direct financial value to be had out of recording. It will give you an indication as to whether your enterprise is profitable or not. So, for people where it is commercial or where there isn't endless money to plow into it, which will be most people, even if they keep them again without the intention of killing them, there's still that kind of need there. So it can pick up on some subclinical issues fairly quickly. The data is not only just for yourself. We will sit in meetings with vets and with nutrition and with genetics reps and various other stakeholders on farm, and other pig farmers to compare data to look at these kind of issues. And actually, if somebody's coming to try and sell you something, a lot of the time they'll look at data, if not for free, then at least sort of, normally for free if you're willing to buy something off them in the long run, and kind of give you a hand. We've got quite a few customers who would take their nutrition from the business that provides them with the best sort of data insight, rather than just, because in reality, mixing wheat, barley, and soya together can only be done in so many different ways. It also helps to inform on decisions to meet that business plan. So if you want to change your breed, and that doesn't matter if that's a commercial breed or a specialist breed, if you want to produce a particular cross, we have a customer who in the beef sector is producing waghorn crosses, which are a longhorn cross wagyu. He has to have data to do that. He had to look at the weight of the carcasses, the performance, the meat quality, all of that kind of thing to make that decision. So if you want to change your genetics, you want to look at, conventional breeds and crossing them, sort of traditional breeds and crossing them, or more commercial breeds, or across what's becoming quite popular with some of the guys I have who are kind of 5, 10, 15 sows and up to about 60. I have a guy who's 60 who just uses them for his own farm shop, is to have conventional have traditional breed boars, and then cross them over perhaps a Duroc sow, so not quite sort of super commercial, or a pure sort of white cross commercial sow. So you have that sort of slightly higher born alive, slightly stronger mothering ability, and then much better meat quality and nice marking on the animal and everything else. Obviously, no good for people who want to show, but sort of a more commercial end of the smaller scale stuff. But again, you have to be recording in order to make those decisions, and there is a degree of personal pride out of it, and sort of boasting rights in the pub. If we don't know what we're doing, we can't tell everybody we're much better than they are. We use this model quite a lot, and my background a long time ago was in the security industry before I sort of went to work on pig farms, and then have ended up sort of through a very inebriated bet with somebody, ending up at an agricultural university when I was much older. Situational awareness is something that's talked about a lot in horrific business seminars and various other things, and that's not my intention here. And I haven't put the high vis on purpose, but hopefully the high vis conveys to you that's not really our bag. Is about perception, comprehension, and projection. So we talk about perception as something you see what's happening. So that's your kind of recording is to see what's happening and to write it down. And without that first step, nothing can be done. You can't do anything without the data. Comprehension is about understanding what's happening. So the thing that you're seeing happen, do you understand it? And to do that in terms of your big data, you need to be monitoring the data. So we still have customers with 9,000 cells who will print out a farrowing card, will write on it, will get themselves or their secretary or somebody in the business will type it in. And then next time she will go back, she will print out a farrowing card, she'll put it up in a farrowing house. And then she'll write on it again, and it just goes round and round and round. But the key thing is to be looking at the data, looking at your data, not just entering it into a book or a system or a fag packet or whatever you put it into, is to compare it with either previous or predicted results, and also to benchmark. That's the key thing, is to be comparing that data like for like. And sometimes you can only do that within your own business, and sometimes you can do that across businesses, and we'll cover that in more depth shortly. Once you've done that, once you have a good understanding of what's happening, you can start to get into projection, which is predicting what will happen. So it's using the data you're seeing and using the data you think is coming by looking at your data accurately and comparing it and benchmarking it and doing all those good things to make changes in your business in order to get the best results. And again, I don't mean best results in terms of pure performance, because again, we have customers who have very different business aims. Some of them want to produce a certain number for their farm shop, some of them produce 4,500 pigs a week for Morrison's, and some of them their absolute drivers of businesses to reduce their carbon footprint. And those businesses vary between about 15 and about 12,000 sows. And then we have the other guys on the sort of the even smaller and even bigger end who most of them are just about their production. But predicting what will happen and having that data to make the change in your business for the best results doesn't mean more pigs per cell per year, better FCR, everything else. It's whatever you define as a business and as an individual who keeps pigs, because most people who keep any animals are sort of a bit more empathetic. It tends to be something that you have an emotional stake in, a personal stake in. Best results don't have to be pure numerical metrics, but the numerical metrics will help you achieve those best results. If what you want is very content pigs, very happy pigs, happy is probably a loaded word, very content pigs, high levels of welfare, low levels of carbon, excellent pigs to show, you don't have to drive the numbers, but you have to have a handle on the numbers to achieve those things. The challenges you face as smaller scale producers is, as I said, the benchmarking data that's available through AHDB, through the levy board in England, which doesn't cover Wales, but the data is available on their website, which it's commonly used sort of all over the world, is that benchmark doesn't really relate to most of your businesses. Now, I am aware of roughly the average size of the herd in Wales, but the average size of the data set is 948 sows, and the vast majority of those will be white crosses. So they'll be large white landrace Duroc crosses, that type of thing. So the tri-star, what we would have called tri-star 10 years ago pigs, and there might be a bit of Hampshire in there and a bit of whatever else, but they're pure commercial pigs, absolute sort of hybrids. That data is irrelevant to a smaller scale and a specialist producer. It doesn't hold any water at all, because it's not representative. When we look at data and we talk about benchmarks and we talk about checking for accuracy and thing, we do everything from standing on a farm gate, leaning on a farm gate and discussing born alive sort of off the top of our head to sort of in-depth complex data analysis using very, very complex algorithms and running data analysis on huge data sets. And both practically speaking and as a statistician, that data is irrelevant to you. It means nothing to you. So the question is, if you don't have accurate benchmarking data, how do you know if you're doing well or not? How do the people who advise you, be it your vet, be it a local advisor, be it a local pig farmer, whoever it is, or a friend or a colleague or whoever it is, again, I come back quite frequently because I used to quite like that when I was more in production. Is we quite like to have boasting rights in the pub and at pig discussion groups, and maybe that's just me, but that I don't go to a pig discussion group without hearing some comparison and a degree of measuring going on. If you record and a few other people doing similar herds who you have contact with, and this data can be used for benchmarking, and actually Benchmark Cymru have a tool available to do that, and we'll get onto that in a bit, which is quite unique, because actually benchmarking, this kind of digitally automated benchmarking on a simple platform in England, there are commercial options, but they are actually very expensive, and they're only really in their infancy, and we're working with some of those people to get them kind of up to speed. That you kind of have that, you have access to that now, and for those specialist herds. So that's the key thing, is that benchmark data set you're talking about is useful. I think if I'm right, Mel, they have to be a member of a pig group to do that, don't they?
Yeah, to be able to compare.
Yes.
Okay. They just need to be a member of the Mented Moch Cymru or Farming Connect pig discussion group, and then they can anonymously compare with others in their group. So they're most likely to be in groups with similar size herds and similar kind of breeds. So that option is available for them. Thank you.
The other thing is that these discussions that come from benchmarking, from comparing data, and sometimes anonymously comparing data, we have a couple of financial benchmarking groups we run privately, where 5 or 6 people will sit around the table and we share the information on a piece of paper, and it's financial, but it's totally anonymized, and they'll then sort of discuss and compare and everything else, but nobody knows who's who, and it's the same for this benchmarking. It can be done anonymously. But those discussions, the discussions that come from those benchmarking groups and from that comparison of data, often help stimulate solid practical ideas, not just the data stuff and the what are we doing wrong, what are we doing right, but if a farm is doing something very differently to you in terms of their figures, what's really helpful is to drill down with them into what they're doing or how they're doing it or something else, and then to use that as a springboard for practical stuff. Because the thing I come back to all the time, and we, my business is a practical business. We spend a lot of time on farm. We actually still have a contracting business. We are practical people. because it has to be for farming. The key thing with this, and I say this to people from 1 pig to 100,000 pigs, is the data in and of itself is useless. It serves no purpose. The thing with yield mapping on combines in the UK has gone mad. People will spend, because you're spending £250,000 on a combine, an extra £5,000 for yield mapping is nothing. And they just have this race to who can collect the most numbers, and it means nothing. It's meaningless. The key thing is comparing that data so you can understand what it means. Comparing it with yourself historically, so benchmarking against yourself going back in years, that's useful, or in quarters or weeks, or however you record. But also is that information, that insight that you learn, okay, our born alive is a bit low, or actually our FCR is better than anybody else's, or whatever it is. You feed that back into your business. That has to feed back into a business. There's an obsession with dashboards in the industry at the minute. A dashboard in a car, you look at a dashboard, you get all the data in an instant, in one hit. If you don't use that data that you're getting back from the dashboard to prompt you to do something physically, to brake, to speed up, to turn, to signal, whatever it is, it's totally irrelevant. You still hit a tree. You have to use the information, that the office stuff has to feed back into the field stuff, because if it doesn't, you may as well not bother. So what can we find? So this is real data from we've kind of anonymized it and taken the axes off just to make it a bit more anonymous. This is real data from a very large Dutch business. So all indoors in Holland, they don't do any outdoor stuff apart from sort of very, very odd person who has a pig or maybe two in there, literally in their back garden. There wouldn't be anybody above 2 or 3 sales really outside. And very few of those are commercial, in the sense that a lot of you guys would be, selling those pigs and producing those pigs to make some money. These guys are enormous indoors. They're about 14,000 sales across about 6 sites. Started as a relatively small operation, but they have a lot of data because they record everything, because they're partly involved in producing breeding stock. So genetics, they have their own nucleus unit. So they record everything. Now, we have when we benchmark and when we do kind of investigation into business data, we have a figure that we use, which we use as a measure of infertility or problems with fertility. And this is a graph that my obsession is seasonal infertility. Just to clarify for everybody, I am absolutely obsessed with daylight and controlling seasonal infertility in animals, and how we can sort of use that to improve their lot. If we look at this, it doesn't really look that different at all. So this is that benchmark of seasonal infertility across all of their data for about 10 years. So there's probably, I don't know, maybe 600,000 lines of data in this data set. Doesn't look like anything. So if we then look at the data, we can change our sort of columns. That's just changing the axis. So now we start to see something emerge. When we actually run this through a serious algorithm, and we run a serious piece of data analysis on this, these farms indeed have seasonal infertility. They have their own vet, so they have a full-time employed vet. The vast majority of people who are sort of in the management team have agricultural degrees. They would be deemed to be highly educated. I would say that's not always everything it's cracked up to be, having gone and done an agricultural degree. Maybe that's me more than the degree itself, but they are experiencing very high levels of seasonal infertility. People talk about summer infertility. It's never in the summer. It's always in the autumn, unless it's very, very, very hot. And it's because basically they are indoors with controlled lighting, and they thought that would solve the problem. But actually, if you have windows, it really doesn't. So these guys have been sitting on this data for 10 years. It's been in their business, and it's probably cost them, we worked this out over those 10 years, somewhere in the region of €1.5 million. This kind of minor mistake that could have been solved fairly straightforward. And that's been sitting in their data for years. And again, they were recording their data, very intelligent people on farm, people who know data, everything else, but they weren't looking at it. They were just typing numbers into a box and filing it away. Second case study. This is probably really, one would hope really interesting. So what I was saying earlier about, you have to make sure you have relevant benchmarks for your farm. You have to have relevant figures. Okay. So the purple column is the current national average of indoor born alive. The other 3 columns are the average born alive for one of my customers for the 3 different herds they run on their farm. So they're a nucleus unit. So they produce the pigs that are crossed and then crossed again to produce commercial breeding sows. They carry 3 different genetic lines. So they have a purebred Duroc, purebred Yorkshire, and purebred Landrace, and they're actually all registered as pedigrees in the country in the country their sort of mothership, as it were, comes from. And they would be the largest pedigree pig breeder in the UK because they're all pedigree. It's part of the contract they have with the genetics company. They insist they're registered. This just shows they're born alive. So for a period, they're average born alive. So the Durocs, because they are a terminal sire line, so they're about producing boars to cross over commercial cells to produce meat, high quality meat, better quality meat, better eating meat. 9.5, and that's pretty low for a commercial herd. The Yorkshires, much closer to the average, and the landrace kind of in the middle. And some of the Yorkshires on that site will have 20s, born alive in a litter. But it's just to demonstrate, for him, the best thing to do for benchmarking is to benchmark himself year on year, week on week, month on month. And you can do that, and it doesn't matter whether you've got 9,000 cells or 9 cells. It's about finding a relevant benchmark, which is why these pig discussion groups, local pig discussion groups with people with similar size herds and similar types of animals, are much more important than having loads of pigs or than having the best piece of software in the world or whatever it is. This is the key thing: is if that benchmark is irrelevant, the learning you're going to take from the data is irrelevant as well. Data recording doesn't have to be complex, and I use this slide quite a lot, and I can't hear everybody uproariously laughing, but I'll assume everybody's laughing anyway. These are two different series of data over time. These are real pieces of data, which show the increasing per capita, so per head consumption of mozzarella cheese is very, very strongly. So what's the p-value there? R-squared, sorry, is 96%. So that is a 96% correlation over time with the number of civil engineering PhDs awarded in the US. Now, the likelihood is those two things are unrelated. However, if you analyze them as a pure statistician, they are indeed very similar. And we have had statisticians look at pig data before, sometimes from outside the industry, and they will tell us that, oh, by crikey, all of your pigs are dying at parity 6. And we say, well, no, that's when we cull them. But it's just to be sure that when we're looking at data, it's very useful to have practical people look at data, because you know when things are correlated and you know when things are just part of your production system. It doesn't have to be complex, and not all of it has value. One of the best things you can do is paper record. So about 15% of the commercial herds in the UK still paper record. Easy to lay your hands on. You always know where your book is. Problem is you frequently drop it in puddles, but that's fine. Normally it requires very little training, no training possibly, no internet, no power, which obviously for a lot of outdoor producers is an issue, because sometimes if you don't record there and then, it just doesn't get done. A lot of people on site in big commercial sites with digital systems will still carry notebooks. The apps which are available are very rarely used at the minute. That's taking a long time to push. It's much more than just better than nothing. It's significantly more than that. It offers you the ability to record everything you need to record, and it offers most of the things digital platforms do without the validation and verification they have. So often digital platforms will tell you if you're trying to farrow a cell 6 months before she was served, or 2 weeks after she was served, it'll tell you you're wrong. But these don't. But in terms of recording your key figures, it's a very, very useful thing to do. And there is an MMC book, there is a Mentor Montgomery book that is available, that's already pre-laid out. The information is there inside the book. You just fill it in. There is also the Measure to Manage tool, which is obviously why we hilariously named this webinar. This is a digital tool that's free to you guys, which again, in the UK, people are paying quite significant amounts for recording systems. And you could go out and buy one, but it would be very expensive and probably less relevant to smaller scale production. This was built with smaller scale and specialist production in mind, but is still perfectly suitable for larger scale operations. And as Mel said, if you're a member of one of those groups, it helps you to benchmark across like-for-like businesses. It's a really useful tool. It's just a really nice thing to have available to you. If you want to buy a piece of software across the UK, it's not cheap, and this isn't available in England. So just very quick examples of the calculations which can be done, on the back of a fag packet, and I can't decide if I love or I hate that phrase. It depends on how stressful the day I've had as to whether I've actually got one with me. But daily live weight gain, this may well be teaching people to suck eggs, and normally at this point in a face-to-face meeting, if people started rolling their eyes at me, we'd call it a day early, but we'll whistle through these just in case. Live weight at exit, And it doesn't have to be slaughter. If you're moving from weaning to growers, or if you wean pigs and you move into a bigger shed later on, or whatever it may be. So live weight at exit from whatever it is, that stage, or it's from the farm, less the live weight at entrance, so the weight gained over days in the period. Not a complex one. FCR is more a more interesting one, and is indeed wanted, dead or alive. There are very few people who take dead FCR as a figure, as a useful metric, but we are sort of leading the charge in the industry to try and do it. Again, it will depend, and for specialist producers, I concur that it's not always the case that you're paid on dead weight, but most people are paid on dead weight. But oddly, we often use live weight as a metric in the industry, even though we're paid for pork, not pigs. Using feed from receipts, invoices, receipts for premix for those of you who mix your own feed. We look at feed delivered to pigs, ideally in kilos, over a predefined period of time, and then the weight gained by those pigs over that same predefined period of time, and we just divide one by the other, and that tells us how many kilos of food have gone to produce a kilo in weight. The really important thing to remember with this is, and we still end up having this conversation with universities who have super fancy fire feeders, they call them, feed intake recording systems, where there's a load cell on the feeder and a load cell on the pig, and everything's measured, and they cost tens of thousands of pounds and all of this very interesting stuff. It doesn't, just because you've delivered the feed to the pig doesn't mean it's eating it. But actually, that's what FCR can let you know, is if you have vermin problems, we see that quite commonly on outdoor units, large, small, and in the middle. If you have issues with feed delivery equipment, so augers that have holes in or are damaging feed. If you had issues with feed delivery, so if you're taking it in bulk, if somebody's blowing it in too quickly, because sometimes that does happen, bulker drivers can be a little bit guilty of that, blowing it in too fast and smashing pellets up, or losing meal in dust. There are lots of different ways to lose feed. So FCR measures feed delivered to the pig, the feed you've offered to the pig, not the feed it's eaten, because some of it in a slatted unit goes down the slats, in an outdoor unit goes in the ground, or the rats take it, or the birds take it. But if you're measuring that and then benchmarking it with your colleagues, with your local producers who have similar herds, if yours is 3 times what theirs is, and your pigs aren't really, really sick, there's a very strong possibility that there's some going missing somewhere. So that's a really good example of a very practical thing that you can derive from the data. So you need numbers to work it out, but actually, and 9 times out of 10, to be honest, big or small units, it's a vermin issue, and it can have quite a significant impact. 3 times is probably a little bit dramatic, but it can certainly shift it by sort of 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. And with FCR, 0.1 shift is on a commercial pig is worth at least a £5. And because feed is our highest cost in pigs, any type of pig production feed is always our highest cost. It's always good to have a handle on it. Daily live weight gain, we've gone back, sorry. So FCR can also be looked at as a whole herd FCR, and this is a really good way of getting an idea of the sow's efficiency in there as well. So this metric obviously includes number of piglets born per sow, how much food the sow is eating, how many litters she's having a year, how many empty days she's having, is all rolled into these numbers. So we look at weight gain from birth to slaughter for the pig, so we have an idea of what the pig produced in terms of its weight. Feed delivered to the pig from weaning, and then also the feed delivered to the sow per cycle, and we divide that by the number of piglets. So we know how much feed a sow ate entirely. We then allocate that out to the piglets evenly, and then we add that to the feed that the pig has eaten itself once it's been weaned. So that gives us a good idea of how our breeding herd is performing and our feeding herd in one measurement. And then if you find that is an unusual number, or it doesn't quite fit, or anything else, you then drill down into, what are our sows eating, and what is our FCR and our finishing herd. FCR and sows on their own is not a particularly good measure, because we obviously generally want them to maintain a relatively stable weight. We don't want it to go up or down that much, and if it's going up or down that much, that's a serious problem. Feed usage on its own in sows can be quite useful. You will see quite a significant difference between indoor herds and outdoor herds, because of course there can be some wastage, and actually between outdoor herds that use long troughs versus feeding on the floor, Daleks, which are a type of individual sow feeder, or indeed you do now get electronic sow feeders outside, fairly unusual, and they tend not to work very well. But that sow feed usage is a really good figure, and actually one of the first metrics we'll often look at when we walk onto a unit is a sow feed usage figure, because If you're using not enough or you're using too much, that's normally a sign that something's going slightly wrong with the breeding herd, either the way the feed is delivered or stored or the health of the cells or something like that. So, like we said earlier, pigs sold per cell per year, or per acre per year, or per arc per year, or per crate. And sometimes this gets extended through to kilos sold per meter squared of finishing space. Now, whether that's finished inside, outside, whatever it is, so it could be per acre, or it could be again per arc or per shed or whatever. But it's often useful to do it over those fixed assets. It is a metric in its own right, and you can work it out fairly easily. You know, you can look at your books, at what you've sold, at your movement licenses, the animals you've moved off holding, and then how many cells you have, and calculate that roughly. Or it's often calculated from sort of some figures that are put together. So from litters per cell per year multiplied by the born alive, and then we factor in the pre-weaning mortality and the finishing mortality to come to a final figure. And that, which you may be well relieved to hear, is that. And we've come in at just under 45 minutes. I know Mel has something to say before we get into the questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dom. That was fab. That was really informative and really useful. So thank you very much for introducing us to the world of recording, monitoring and benchmarking. Briefly, before we move on to the Q&A session, I have to say, Dom, it's perfectly timed. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. So before we move on to that, I've just got a few things I'd like to cover off and a few things I'd like to mention that Mentor Moch Cymru currently offer that might be of interest to you. So first off, I know Dom mentioned that we've got the brand new recording booklet. So we'll be sending a copy of this to each of you. If we don't have your address, we'll get in touch with you to get that. But it's a really useful guide and template to use. And it, if you just want to leave it at that and just use the paper based, that's fantastic. And it's up to you how much you record or how much you prefer not to. But at least you've got that option then. And then also, as Dom mentioned, very kindly mentioned, we've got the new Pig Measure to Manage online tool. As Dom explained, there's loads of there's a few commercial programs already out there in the pig sector, but these are generally very expensive and very complex. So Pig Measure to Manage is really user-friendly. It's geared up for small to medium scale producers. It's relevant for businesses that farrow to finish or just farrow. It's super flexible. It's bilingual as well, and more importantly, it's also free. So we've got this fantastic resource that we've launched with Farming Connect, and it's a free online platform that you can use. What's great about it as well is that you can compare year against year for your own farm. But you can also compare against others if you're in a producer group. If you're not currently in one of our producer groups or in a Farming Connect producer group, we do have a virtual small scale producer group, and you're very welcome to join that. It's an open meeting. They've got a meeting, the next meeting in a few weeks' time, where they're actually discussing ideas of topics they'd like to look into over the coming year, and what kind of speakers they'd like to come in. So if you are interested in joining that producer group, it's a perfect time to do so. As I said, we have developed the tool in partnership with Farming Connect, so you do need to be a member of Farming Connect to access it, but that's completely free and it's a simple online form. So those of you that aren't yet registered with Farming Connect, we'll get in touch with you individually to help you to get signed up. But of course, if you prefer us not to register you for Measure to Manage, please let us know, and you can also unregister at any time as well. Moving on as well, the next webinar we've got is next week, so it's on Tuesday the 8th of February, and it's looking at the pig carcass, an insight at abattoir level. So that should be a really good, really interesting session as well, so hopefully you can join us for that. And then I'm also pleased to announce that we've started our practical events again. So we've just confirmed 2 dates up in North Wales for a butchery day and a practical processing workshop the art of curing and sausage making, and that's in Llangefni on the 15th and 16th of March. So the courses are heavily subsidised, and it's a full day covering butchery and a full day covering processing. So if you're interested in that, please get in touch. Again, don't forget the project can provide 100% funding for herd health plans, and we also have grants of up to £750 for marketing as well. So get in touch if you haven't signed up for those schemes yet. And as Dom mentioned earlier in the presentation as well, it's a great idea to have a business plan, and we can also help you with that. So if you're interested in developing a business plan, get in touch. And finally, don't forget, we've got a load of information and resources, fact sheets and publications on our resource hub on the website. So if you haven't checked that out yet, please go and have a look and see what we've got available. And yeah, if there's anything you need from us as a project, any feedback or any topics of interest for future webinars or events, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And now, so Dom, we're going to go on to the Q&A session. If you haven't yet posted any questions, you've still got time to do so. There's a button at the bottom of the screen, Q&A. Just type that in and we'll get that. So we've already had a few come in, so let's crack on with these. So first question for you, Dom. How many farms in the UK record?
So at the minute, we estimate it is around 85%, and that covers the whole industry. So that's everybody from sort of very, very small to very, very large. And I can tell you, I think the number of pig holdings at last count was 12,000. So it's probably around 9,000, and that covers 85%. We think so. There's around 400,000 sows in the UK, and just one business holds 85% of that data. So it's pretty ubiquitous. But there are still some quite large producers who obviously we tend to work with the guys who record because we need something to look at in terms of data. But there are some quite large producers who we're aware of who don't record anything apart from basically movements because they have to.
Okay, brilliant, thanks, Dom. Right, we've got another one as well. This is quite an interesting one. If you were only going to record 2 metrics, what are the most important, or what do you think are the most important?
I would say your FCR, because your feed is everything, is the biggest cost. You know, it can be 60-70% of cost on most units, and at the minute is incredibly expensive. And also, I would probably look at, for specialist producers, I would look at pigs sold per lactation place or per farrowing place per year. So either that per acre or per quarter acre or per arc or whatever metric, whatever you have that's limited. So if it's land that's limited, or the number of arcs, or the building meter square, whatever it is. So pigs sold and the way they convert feed, because they're basically just eating money.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really handy to know. Right, I think this question came in quite early because I think we've addressed it, but I'll ask it anyway. So is there any technology available to make recording easier?
Yeah, so outside of sort of conventional recording books and software, and there's a whole range of software. There are some apps. A lot of the online platforms for recording now have applications, but like I say, the uptake tends to be quite low. We do a lot of work looking at RFID tags, and whilst they're not mandatory in pigs, and actually we use a different type of tag than they use in sheep, because the sheep ones are quite expensive. And they're quite heavy for a piglet's ear, so we use a specialist type of tag for pigs that we do a lot of work with that and sort of build the software and things. The other thing is there's increasingly it has to be a large enough site to justify the expenditure, but things sort of drones. Some people are using drones to record pig behaviour or pig movements. Some people are using cameras in buildings to look at tail biting or pig behaviour, or even weight. We have some fairly successful camera wears out doing various things. And then there's some really simple stuff, and I would encourage anybody to look at this for feed usage, and it doesn't have to be a very big business to justify this if the pigs are of a suitable value, is if you're using a bin for feed instead of bags. is actually putting telemetry on the bin is now quite cheap. So either load cells or they use strain gauges. You just drill 2 holes in the bin leg and sort of slot this thing in, and it will tell you every day how much feed there is in the bin, and it will graph it out over time for you. So you can look at how much feed your pigs have used over a time period. So for calculating your FCR, or again for looking at a hole in the bin, a hole would be an extreme example, but vermin damage and stuff like that, that's quite useful. So there's a few different options out there.
Brilliant, thanks Dom. And yeah, as Dom mentioned as well, there's the free recording booklet that we offer, and there's the free online benchmarking tool, so no cost to you at all. We've got one question coming, a new one as well. What would be the benchmark weight gain to kilogram of feed offered? Tricky one.
I've got to work that backwards because we normally work the other way. So FCR, we would expect within the range of, for a commercial pig, 2.2 to 2.4 kilos of feed per kilo of weight gained. So what does that work out at? That would work out as, I really should, this is where I tell you that statisticians do all their maths using a calculator. So my mental arithmetic is absolutely shocking. So around 2.2, sorry. I would, no, sorry.
I can give you a few minutes for that, Dom, because another question's come in, which I think might be, I can shield that one because it's quite a generic one.
420 grams. Oh. If you want to figure off the top of my head, 420 to 450 grams. So say between 400 and 450. But the key thing to remember is that that's a sort of an industry benchmark, looking at 2.2 to 2.4. That will be for a very commercial pig. Not necessarily, you don't actually often see a huge difference between indoor and outdoor herds, because of course most commercial outdoor pigs are finished indoors but on straw. There's not often a huge difference between straw and slats. Across the industry there is, but actually from site, a very good straw site will often outcompete a poor slatted site. But that's the sort of ballpark you would aim for. If they're very traditional breeds, and I'd be interested to know what breed if you put another type of question in, it could be 3 to 1. So you could be looking at 330 grams. It could even be 4 to 1. So you could be looking at 250 grams for every kilo feed offered, because they don't convert feed to fat quite sufficiently as they do to muscle. Sorry.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dom. No, that was a really comprehensive answer. Thank you very much. This other question that's come in is from Andrea. How do you create a small business with pigs? So I'm happy to start that off if you like, Dom, and then if you want to chip in if I've missed anything. So top tip is quite a broad question, but a really good question. So some top tips: definitely consider your market, find your market. So identify if there's a gap and see if you can fill it. So definitely don't buy your pigs and then try and find a market as an afterthought. We have been in the situation where we've had panic calls from producers who have they've bought a batch of pigs, they're ready, they're finished, and they haven't sold them and they don't have a route to market. So certainly first thing to consider is where you're going to get rid of the end product. Look at your skills and knowledge. So it's really important that you develop these. If you need any support or help, we've got a load of training sessions that are generally free. We've got a lot of information and recorded webinars on the website. And yeah, come to any of our events as well. So definitely look at your skills and knowledge of pig keeping. Have a think about what you want to get out of it as well. That's really important going in. Also have a think about what interests you. Is it the finishing, or is it the breeding side of it, both, or is it the end, looking forward to selling your end product at the end? Have a sort of a clear vision of what you think you'd be interested in, and also consider your resources that you've got, whether that's space, facilities on farm, time commitment as well, because that will help you determine the size of the enterprise and also the nature of the business. Definitely look at sourcing pigs from a reputable source as well. More often than not, if you're new to this as well, they will stay with you and help you in future years as well. There'll be a bit of a mentor. Otherwise, come to us and we can also look at getting you a mentor. Get a herd health plan as well. Once you do have set up your herd, find out what the health status is. it's 100% funding up to £400 from the project, so it's win-win. Also speak with other pig producers and just find out from their experience, what have they learned over the years. That can be a really valuable source. I've mentioned we've got the virtual small pig keepers producer group running. You're very welcome to join that. It's an open group. And what I'll do as well, Andrea, I'll ask our development officer that covers your area, Lauren. I'll ask her to get in touch with you just to have a bit of a discussion about your plans, what you're hoping or planning to do, and also see if there's the ways that the project can support you in starting off with pigs. Any other top tips there, Dom, that you think?
I'd echo most of that. It's important that if you're going to take weaners in to have a reputable source. There is obviously at the minute, sort of across the UK, a little bit of an issue with too many pigs, and we do see exactly what you said. We see some people will expand their sow herds, and then sort of have pigs ready to go on a wagon and go, oh crikey, where are we going to sell them? And that's the same thing. If a local abattoir is taking 4 pigs a week, or a local abattoir is taking 4,000 pigs a week, it doesn't mean they'll take 5 or 5,000. Actually, expansion is the same. Herd health plan is absolutely critical, and again, 5 or 5,000 pigs doesn't matter. Health can be a real burden with pigs. The big advantage pigs have over many other types of livestock is they require very little equipment, very little machinery. The equipment, the drinkers and things like that, are fairly specialist, but you don't need a tractor to take bales of hay out to something in the winter. You don't need a quad bike to go raveling around sheep to make sure they're all still there. You're very rarely out chasing them at 3 a.m. in the morning because they've jumped a fence or something. You keep the pigs in one place and you go to the pigs rather than having to go all over the countryside looking for them. So they are a really good enterprise to diversify into. The other thing I would say is I don't know whether you've got stock at the minute or anything else. The thing that is unusual with pigs compared to beef and sheep is one of the really important things, and your herd health plan will identify this, is biosecurity. Is not going to visit other pig farms and then coming back and walking your own pigs and sort of mixing that. I will say, and this is the best example I can ever give. We train a lot of new sales reps who come into the industry from outside the industry. For a ruminant nutritionist to turn up on farm with a pair of wellies is pretty standard. If you turned up on a commercial pig unit with your own wellies, you'd be shot. It's just not the dumb thing, and it's important to keep those lines very clear. And people talk about outdoor pigs and biosecurity being difficult, and yes, you still have rodents and birds and all of these things, but it doesn't mean that you have to just let it slide. Just another sort of 10 quid pair of wellies just for your pigs, and making sure that if you go onto another unit, be it indoors, be it outdoors, when you come home, you have a shower, you change your clothes, even if you're not going to have 48 hours away from the pigs, which is what we'd always recommend. Just make sure you have a shower, change your clothes, because they do carry all sorts of things that you can bring in from another herd into your herd, and it goes from being really pleasant to being pretty challenging fairly quickly. And there are things, touch wood, ASF hasn't hit the UK yet, but it is possibly on its way, and the last thing anybody wants is that. And we have pockets, particularly in the northeast, where there's a lot of pigs, commercial pigs, sort of swine dysentery, which is not notifiable unless you're red tractor, and then it's sort of a voluntary thing that you have to do as red tractor. It sort of bounces around in Yorkshire, and in reality, the only way to get rid of swine dysentery is to cull a herd out, and nobody really wants to do that. It's not a very pleasant thing to do, and it's very financially expensive. And again, it's expensive whether you've got 5 pigs or 5,000 pigs. So biosecurity and have a plan.
Could be avoided, couldn't it?
Absolutely, totally avoidable. 9 times out of 10, it's totally avoidable. Exactly, and we tend to see it move within businesses, which just shows people aren't changing boots, or they haven't thought about the fact that the footwell of their pickup truck is full of mud, or whatever it is. Biosecurity and have a plan. But the key thing, Mel is absolutely spot on, is the outlet. Do not, the same as any other business, don't produce something unless somebody wants to buy it. And if anybody wants to buy weaners, I could find lots of weaners at the minute very cheaply from England, because we're really struggling to move them. So anybody who wants to buy some pigs, let me know.
Brilliant. Top tip. Totally agree with you. Biosecurity is really, really important. Yep. We've got one last question. I think we've got time for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Dom, I weigh all slaughter pigs. My buyer says it's not viable to spend that much amount of time and man hours per week, and I should just pick them by eye. What are your thoughts? The batches of 500 at a time.
I have customers who do the same as you. They weigh every single pig, and they'll be selling 2,000 pigs a week. So there are several ways you can do this. I would say I would say very politely nuts to your buyer. I would say it's always important to weigh pigs, whether you've got 3 of them or 10 of them or 10,000 of them. So one option is to weigh them at one point in time and mark them. So I don't know if you draw as one lot of 500, you'll often, commercial units, which 500 pigs, serious commercial unit, will often take several slaughter draws, and obviously you can't get 500 pigs on a wagon, so presumably they're going at least 2 loads. People will often take 2 or 3 draws of slaughter pigs. So what you can normally do is, if you weigh once at the beginning of that period, you can then mark them into 3 groups for this week, next week, and the week after. That works quite well, and you have to know which weight bands they are for you. And there are weigh scales that will do that for you and actually mark them in different weigh bands. They're not cheap, but they work very well. So you just run the pigs through and it marks them. The other option, and we do this a lot when we're training stockmen and training fieldsmen for the integrators, is to calibrate your eye. So you can do it by sight of eye, and we do have a lot of people who draw pigs by sight of eye. I know a lot of people who are very good at it and can do it within 5 kilos, 2 kilos, and a lot of people who've been doing it for 20 years who are terrible at it. It's not always an experience thing. One thing that often helps is, depending again on the penning and the size of pens and stuff, is to weigh 5 or 6 pigs that look very large, very small, and sort of somewhere in the middle, and spray on the side of them the weight. Actually write the weight on the side of the pig, and then let them back in the pen. Obviously the same pen, don't mix pigs because they'll beat each other to death. Let them back into the pen, and then when they're all walking around the pen, you calibrate your eye. So you know that if this one is 100 kilos and that one is 90 and this one is somewhere between the two of them, it's probably 95. It's quite a cheap and effective way. If you've already got a good set of weigh scales, I would say also make sure you calibrate your weigh scales and don't use bags to feed, because bags to feed are never 25 kilos exactly. But calibrate your eye. And then the other thing you can do often, if you're finishing in the same sheds, which at 500 pigs you probably are, is you can sometimes, and this is a very old school way of doing it, but it works quite well. It holds a lot of water. Is if you have a target weight of whatever, 105, 115 kilos live, 97, whatever it is, weigh some pigs. Make sure you get some that weigh that amount. Mark them again, not necessarily with weight this time, but just mark them. And then when you let them back into a pen, look at the furniture in the pen. Look at if all of your drinkers are at the same height, for argument's sake, or if all the stanchions are in the same place or whatever, is find a mark on the wall or draw a mark on the wall that tells you that's your target for the height, because actually pigs height, their weight within the same genotype. If you're buying different batches from different sources and the genotype changes and nutrition changes and everything else, not always, but if it's a fairly stable sort of herd dynamic, that height is a pretty good indicator. Or just mark the length on the wall somewhere, or both the height and the length. But just to calibrate your eye, so spray the weights on the side of pigs, and we do that quite a lot. And because I don't draw a lot of slaughter pigs, if a customer asks me to do it, I will do that every time I go onto a unit. I'll calibrate my eye again, and because between different genotypes it varies. Or just mark something on the wall, and that'll give you a pretty good indication. But I would say it's never wasted time weighing pigs. We have a lot of customers, big customers. One guy who has 2,500 sows. They've got about 10,000 position places. They'll weigh every pig that goes through that unit, because that's what you're paid for. If you're not weighing them, I don't know what else would you be doing with the time, I guess. It's not sort of, you wouldn't go out to do it as a hobby, but it's a key driver for your business. And the key thing is, particularly on that kind of scale of business, one would assume you're on a kind of Q box contract where you've got the optimal weight band in the middle. Obviously, you want as many kilos as you can put on the pig on that kind of commercial contract without going overweight. If I get penalised at 105 kilos, I want every pig to go into that abattoir at 104.9. Now, you can calibrate your eye to a degree, but not to that degree. So if you really want to push that box, if you're on that Q box, particularly if it varies for balls and gilts, which most of them do, if you really want to push that contract to the absolute top you can earn for every individual pig, I would still weigh every single pig. And I would do that whether you have 500 or 5 or 500,000, it wouldn't matter.
Brilliant. I think that's a perfect place to end this evening's webinar. Brilliant. So thank you very much, Dom. Really useful, really informative webinar. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us as well. I do hope you found it useful. We will be putting a link for our feedback form in the chat, and we'd be really, really, really grateful if you could just spend 2 minutes to give us feedback on the webinar. It is really useful to us, and it does help us plan future events. So yeah, really grateful if you could fill that in for us. So for now, thank you once again, and we hopefully you'll join us again soon for another webinar or event. Thank you, Dom.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye now.